It's a miracle.
Yay! I love when tech works. It's just like the most comforting thing ever.
Of course, my head is chopped off, so let me just, there we go.
I know. You like first see just your top half and then it switches over. We'll give everyone just a minute to join.
Perfect.
It's great to see you too. You're in Brooklyn, right?
I'm in Brooklyn, so it's raining, and of course they're drilling in my building, and my 2.5-year-old may run, so our view hear some stuff, but you know, that's COVID.
There are many calls where I'm like in a serious conversation and he just like swoops in and like jumps on my lap. You know, COVID life, as you said.
COVID life.
So Chloe, okay, it's 9 o'clock for me, 12 o'clock for you. I'm on the West Coast. It looks like it's time to get started.
I can't wait.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us.
Oh, it's an honor.
So for everyone that's, oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. I have a lot of questions for you for today. But for everyone that's just joining, I see some of your numbers are rolling in. Thank you for being here on this fine Wednesday. I cannot believe it is almost November. That is wild. But for anyone out there that's joining for the first time, this is Women Who Do series is dedicated to upholding my grandmother's legacy. You know, she really stood for power and strength, and I think that's especially something we all need right now. And also just to celebrate these amazing women that we have here speaking with us, to really focus on careers and community. So again, excited to have you all today. And for anyone who knows me, I'm Jessie. I have a lot of questions, so I'm gonna just dive right on in. So I've read a lot about you, Chloe, and you have had like an extraordinary career. It's quite amazing, and especially I think like right now, your position is something that is so important. So for anyone out there who's watching that might be unfamiliar with your work, can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what you do and you know, how you highlight inclusion and diversity strategies in your work and, you know, really use that to help leaders and teams?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. And again, thanks so much for having me. It's funny, I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we did not have the money at the time to afford Anne Klein, but there was an Anne Klein store in Harvard Square, and we always would say to ourselves in high school, like, when we get real jobs, we're gonna go buy like a shirt. So it's always been sort of an aspirational brand. So it's really fun to be here with you. So thank you.
Oh, that's so cool. I love hearing stories like that.
Totally. So, you know, it's been a really interesting past 8 or 9 months. I've had this really, I would say, good fortune of being able to, in the past 20 years, I'm dating myself, but I've been able to work on political campaigns, on sort of the efforts to build nonprofits. I've worked in philanthropy. I've worked at a real estate tech company, and I've never seen anything like this. And I think there's sort of a couple things that are really different. And what we're seeing is heads of HR, heads of D&I, and CEOs completely ripping up the playbook, because you can no longer say, okay, there's a way that we're going to think about wellness, and there's a way that we're going to think about, you know, corporate social impact, and oh, D&I is over here. All of these things are layered together. So we have obviously a health crisis. There's an economic crisis. There's this unbelievably important and essential social justice movement that's amazing and empowering and also deeply stressful for people. And then we're in the midst of political drama. And so all of these different things are happening, and they're impacting different groups of people in different ways. So these are not equal opportunity crises. Obviously, African Americans and Latinos are being disproportionately impacted by the things that have created the Black Lives Matter movement, i.e. Black men are being killed. They're being disproportionately impacted by COVID. And so for companies, it is critical to take a look at how all of these things can be knit together to be holistically supportive strategies for people. and think about all the different levers that they have to make sure that African Americans, Latinos, parents feel that they can effectively do their jobs. I mean, obviously, we also know that African Americans, Latinos are being disproportionately fired and furloughed. Same is true for women. I think the thing that I feel, I would say, optimistic about is not every company, but a lot of companies that we work with in particular are thinking
Mhm.
this way. They're thinking creatively and they're calling on everybody. And this is what I think is particularly motivating. Everybody has to lean in. This is everybody's job. There's this wonderful organization that works with high school students called Facing History and Ourselves, and they talk about being an upstander, not a bystander. And this is
Mm.
really that moment. And we're helping companies develop allyship programs so that every single person has a role to play. This is not just the CEO's job. This is coming from the bottom and the top and obviously through the middle. So that was a long answer, but obviously I care about this stuff.
Yeah, no, and like, what do some of those strategies look like? Because I feel like I love what you said about upstander versus bystander, because often I think we think about the company culture coming from the top and from
Yeah,
HR, but there's so many different, I mean, it's really the people that make up the company that put forth that culture.
yeah,
So, like, what do some of those strategies look like, and how do
yeah.
you train people on this?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So, I think for so long, we have collectively conflated diversity and inclusion. We've thought of those things as the same thing. Diversity is something we think we've spent a lot of time on. We haven't achieved the ends. The numbers of African Americans and women who are holding top CEO jobs, it's abysmal. We obviously have a huge ways to go. I think we spent a lot of time doing, I would call inclusion type policies,
Mm-hmm.
but my colleague Jonathan McBride and I are really interested in this next phase of the work, which Pat Waters from LinkedIn calls it belonging. Our favorite researcher is this brilliant guy at NYU named Kenji Yoshino. And he's done this really important work about covering. And what covering is, it's a strategy by which people, most people, hide aspects of their identity to fit in. And what's
Mm.
fascinating about this work is it's universal, it's global. And when I say it's universal, over 40% of white men report that they cover. And it's deadly for the workplace because if you're covering, you're spending all your time hiding parts of yourself. You're not bringing your best ideas. And from a financial investment perspective, a company's paying everybody, but they're not getting the full talent. And so just one
Mm-hmm.
simple strategy to start. There's a whole lot of work you can do on this, but one simple strategy that we're working on with some of our clients is beginning to unpack that covering that we do every day. And I really believe it does start with leaders. And so we're helping our leaders think about telling their stories. And it sounds fluffy and it sounds simple, but it really isn't. Because if a leader tells a story about some aspect of their own identity or something about themselves that their team didn't know, you'll notice people see you differently, trust you differently, and start telling their own stories. And it creates this hopefully virtuous cycle. We've seen this at companies, virtuous cycle of people bringing more of themselves, their identity, their ideas, their creativity, and productivity and growth emerges. And big companies are thinking about structuring this kind of work. Certainly some of our clients are doing, but also some Silicon Valley tech companies. Some people are calling it allyship programs. That's less the point than how do you build in these systems and trainings.
Yeah, wow. And I imagine it takes more than, one sit down session with someone to kind of unpack this and explain this. So, what does
Yeah,
that timeline look like?
it's such a good question. I read somewhere, whoever said this, I think it's really the right way to say it. Staying with the allyship theme, we're all allies in training. It's not I'm not a believer personally in a one off training. It's very tempting to do a one off training. That's actually not how adults learn. I've got a 5-year old, and the way that she's learning to read and to write her letters is practicing. It becomes something that she does with a group. She does it at home individually. We've created kind of some momentum around it, and that's exactly how adults learn too.
Mm.
There's this wonderful notion. I love the way you asked that question. There's this wonderful notion that you, I'm sure, know about of nudges
Yeah.
that, right, exactly. And so what we try to do with our clients is here's the data, here's the theory that sort of gets at people's heads. we often, almost always, incorporate stories. Over the summer, what CEOs said is that the single most important thing that moved them was hearing focus groups of their Black employees tell their stories. That
Wow.
changed their lives. It changed their lives. So we try to incorporate both the head and the heart. And then we encourage people to start experimenting, just trying little things, little experiments on yourself, with your teams, come back together as a group, talk about what you learned, try a new experiment. We do that in technology. We have that sort of
Mhm.
spirit of try, test, fail fast, but it's time to try applying those strategies to ourselves.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe I'm just trying to get some like free work out of you right now as a
Go for it.
CEO myself.
Yeah.
But like, do you think, what are some of those strategies look like? Can you give us like one or two examples?
Yeah. There's one thing, and I'm trying to think, I want to be sort of thoughtful about the confidentiality of our client. There's one thing that I'll talk about something that I did at my previous company. We started looking at meetings. And what's very interesting, this sounds small, but it isn't. Across all of our clients and at previous roles that I've had, when people talked about their experiences of exclusion, it was often about something that happened in a meeting, because it's when you're coming together, you feel exposed,
Hmm.
different learning styles show up better or less well. For example, people who are extroverted thinkers do great in meetings. They think on the fly, they're able to process thoughts. For an introvert, it's actually much harder. So we're sort of looking at some of those dynamics, but a few very specific things that we've seen clients do effectively and that I've done at some of my previous roles. One is share. This sounds so simple, but it's very helpful. Share ahead of a meeting what you plan to discuss. So someone who's a little more shy or who's introverted has the time to process, what is the topic? What do I want to contribute? So that's one thing. The second thing is we introduced something called the plus one or three then me rule. So if you're an extrovert, if you kind of talk a lot, wait for three other people to talk before you jump in. That
Mm.
just creates the space for other people, particularly in a remote environment. You got people on Zoom, and it's easy for folks to kind of just talk over each other. The plus one, if you're more introverted, get you one thought in, just one, around every meaningful topic that's discussed, because it just, you start hearing your own voice and it builds sort of your own presence in the meeting. So those are just two examples of things that big companies, Microsoft does a lot of this work, big companies have used to great effect around meetings.
Wow. I love that. I mean, I'm a Leo, so I'm definitely that extroverted
Uh-huh.
side. And I noticed I was actually starting to primarily hire other like really strong personalities. So I've started asking people on interviews what their sign is, because that can be like a really good indication of how they work. And I love astrology. I've brought this up on previous um, women who do episodes, and I think that, I mean, it's been like actually so impactful, and seeing that people are usually pretty true to their sign and how they work and how they like to communicate.
Yeah, it's so interesting. One of the things that we've been helping our clients do is think about how to bring in talent, how to assess talent. And we believe very much, and some of these things that I'm talking about, they're not necessarily diversity and inclusion strategies, they're just good human capital strategies. But we believe very much in assessing people based on their competencies. So, what have
Mm-hmm.
you done in your past work that demonstrates that you can do this, even if you don't have the track record or the credential or the exactly relevant analogous experience? So that's one thing that we help people think about. The other, and we've started doing this, and I love this. We start asking, how do you learn? As in,
Mm.
how do you process information? How do you absorb it? How do you and then how do you like to work the best? I think we often hear the how do you like to work, but how do you learn, particularly in this environment where we're all in different spaces, we all have different kinds of ways of processing information. So that's something else to think about as you hire people.
Oh, yeah, I love that question. Okay, thank you for the tip, Chloe.
I keep it coming. I love it.
And I'd say like one thing, I feel like there's definitely a divide between what an inclusive workplace means. Like it's not just having a diversity of people per se, but I think it's making sure that everyone feels included and
Yeah.
welcome. Can you tell us a little more about what an inclusive workplace looks like and kind of how to set that standard?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, as I mentioned before, I think a lot of companies have focused on the D, and it's important, right? It's really important that everybody have opportunity to find great work. Absolutely. And then I think companies that have been more creative over the past, let's call it 15 years, looked a lot at inclusion strategies. That is a lot of sort of policy to it and structure, debiasing performance review processes, for example. About 2 or 3 years ago, this brilliant HR leader named Pat Waters, who was at LinkedIn at the time, ushered into our collective consciousness the notion of belonging.
Hmm.
And she wrote this important piece in Harvard Business Review, and suddenly everybody was talking about belonging. And if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's three from the top, as in it is a profound, universal human desire to be accepted in our communities, in our tribes, in our workplaces. And when you can achieve belonging, that's when people really bring their full selves to work. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't think anyone's cracked the nut on this yet. And what we're trying to do with our clients right now is think about the sorts of strategies to help build that feeling of belonging. I do think Kenji's work is a huge part of that, because if you feel like you're covering up 75% of who you are, how could you possibly feel like you belong in the workplace? And so I think work around allyship is part of that. I think work around storytelling is part of that. So we're going to start building out that playbook, but I think that's really, really important. And I would just say this about inclusion. I've always had this problem with inclusion. It's important, but almost by definition, inclusion means someone's doing the inviting. There's
Mm.
still a power imbalance, whereas in the sort of belonging state, everybody has an equal right to be there. So I
Yeah,
think that's the ultimate place to get to.
very cool. And for like, would you say team building activities are like a really great way to integrate that, or does more of the work happen kind of like in the workplace in meetings?
It's a really good question. You know, I think that teams are more important than ever. And as in, I think that we have designed a lot of our learning and development strategies as if everybody's an individual contributor, as if everybody has a goal that they're advancing that has nothing to do with anyone else around them
Mm-hmm.
rather. And so one of our clients is actually doing super interesting work. They actually build a lot of the sort of tools and software to help teams collaborate and be successful. Talk about something that's important right now. But not everybody has figured out what actually makes teams successful and agile and nimble and work really effectively. I know you're asking a different question, but I'm very interested in this team thing right now. So that's one thing. Look, I think that trust is important.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an Edelman Trust survey that comes out every year that shows that people, workers, Americans, but actually globally, people trust their employer. They trust companies more than they trust religious institutions, more than they trust government. I actually don't have data on this, but I've got to believe that it's more than just a feeling of, are you competent? There's a feeling of, my workplace is personal and I like and trust the people around me. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think things that are social and fun and allow people to show more of themselves are actually think those are strategic tactics.
Hmm. Okay, I like that. No, I'm asking because it's really just fun. And especially, I mean, during quarantine, it's like, I think we all just like miss social contact so much. So my team has been all coming, it's very small, but a few of us have been coming in LA. And after work, we'll do yoga classes together. And I feel
Yeah.
like I mean, I feel like my thoughts aren't even like, is this a good team building activity? I'm just like, this is so nice to be working out with other people and just be doing something fun,
Yeah.
and unload the day.
Well, I think what's important there too is you're showing something of yourself. So it's something that you care about, it's something that gives you, I'm making this up, but probably some sense of peace and calm and being grounded. And inviting people into that experience it's actually a little vulnerable, right? I mean, not every boss would do that. And I think there's a lot of sort of stuff about being a vulnerable boss. Yes, also being maturely vulnerable. You don't have to sort of like suddenly collapse into tears at the workplace, but
Yeah.
you're showing a side of yourself that's important, that's sort of like foundational for you, and you're bringing people in. And I think that people will show more of themselves to you because you've invited them into your space.
All right, good. I'm glad to hear that.
But keep doing
um,
it.
so, there's been such a massive impact, and it's been so great to see all these changes around social justice right now. And this is such an important time. So I mean, obviously, right now, like, kind of these conversations you're having with companies is more important than ever before.
Yeah.
I mean, it was always super important, but I'm glad people are recognizing now with everything that's going on um, in the world that this is something that needs to change, and it absolutely needs to happen now, not tomorrow, not the day
Yeah.
after, but now. Kind of like, what changes have you been noticing with companies you're working with, and how kind of has all the um, everything going on in the world impacted that in terms of social
Yeah.
justice?
So I'm going to steal something that my colleague John talks a lot about, but I'll give him credit. I'll tell him later that I told him this, that I told you guys this. We're seeing, and I'm going to say US because I don't have sort of a global perspective on this, but US companies on these topics, because while this was a US movement and moment, we've actually seen all across the world people have Black Lives Matter protests, it's, gatherings, etc. So we're seeing about 20% of companies take this really seriously, kind of go a little silent and get down to work. And I think we're going to start seeing things come out that I actually believe are not going to be quick and surface, but they'll represent that they've really done some hard work and are thinking about long-term sustainable change that may be even hard for them to do. It may not be things that are easy. It may be expensive. It may be vulnerable making. It may actually turn off some of their customers. So that's what's called about 20% of companies. Then I think there's about 20% of companies who did quick stuff, made a big donation, put out a statement, and kind of haven't done anything since. And then the balance, we don't really know, and we'll see over time what happens. But for people in my field, 20% is massive. I've never seen 20% of companies, big and small, take this stuff so seriously. And I think one of the biggest things that's really powerful, if people have, let me just sort of make it very personal. I am seeing my white friends look at their own behavior, what they say, what they believe, and be incredibly open, talk about how ashamed they are. And I will speak for my own self. I had two stories about this. I've been doing this work for a really long time. Like, this is, in fact, my life's work. But over the past 6 months, just like everyone else, there were two things that really stood out to me. One is, so I've got this, 6'3" husband. He's African American. And about a year ago, we were having some sticky issue. I think it was with a teacher. And I said to him, I better handle this. She might be intimidated by you. And I realized the minute I said it, I just did to him what his community has been telling him ever since he was a teenager, that you're big and you're scary and don't scare white women. And I just reinforced that. And so even though I've been doing this work, I said something that just made him cover himself up. So that's one thing. And I'm seeing CEOs talk about these sort of same stories of like, I've realized I've been doing things not the way I should have been doing them. The other one, I'm hearing CEOs talk about this a lot with it we work with and others. I've got a 5-year-old daughter, and I have not talked about race with her. And I'm not quite sure what I thought was going to happen. Like, somehow something would happen perhaps, and that I'd help her unpack it. But I realized over the past 6 months, I just have not equipped her. I did not give her the tools to know what to do and say when something happens in the playground. And it's not a if, it's like a when. And so I think in big and small ways, for white people in particular, we're all doing a lot of really hard work. And I think that that's going to, not everybody, but I think a lot of us are. And I think that that's going to mean more long-term sustainable change from people who are actually running institutions where they can scale that work throughout the building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think for the companies you mentioned that are kind of have been a little bit silent, I think in the beginning there was like a really quick reaction sometimes to maybe someone that wasn't just going out there and immediately taking quick action. But it's interesting to hear that, because I think a lot of times there was some sensitivity around, I don't want to just put out like a really quick PR message just to like cover
Yeah.
us and make us look good. This is it's so much more important than that, and really showing kind of like long-term change is just like absolutely the most critical thing.
Yeah, look, and I think, what we've been advising our clients to do, certainly have open communication with all of your employees. Make sure they know that you're listening, that you care deeply, and that you want to keep an open line. One of the big things we've been doing is help companies set up their employee resource group structure and strategy to give a way for everybody. If you're African American, Latinx, if you want to be part of the Pride ERG, give everybody a way of leaning in, as well as if you're an ally. But also, we've been encouraging them to say, don't rush something out. Think about a way that you develop a business strategy. It's thoughtful, it's backed by data. You do sort of a cost benefit analysis. You think about risks. You think about how's this going to last over the long term. And then you pilot something and you bring people in. We do diversity so differently, and yet it shouldn't be. It's a business strategy, and it should be done just as thoughtfully as anything else you do in your company.
Exactly. Um, so Chloe, I think we can't have this conversation without talking about the election. I cannot believe it's just in a couple of days. I know, deep breaths.
Deep breaths.
um, and what's really, obviously this is one of the most important elections of our lifetime, but also this marks the 100-year anniversary that women have the right to vote. So it's kind of wild to see that's happening this year. Everything crazy going on.
Yeah.
So kind of how do you think that this impacts the election?
How do women impact the election?
How this anniversary of 100 years that women are able to vote.
Yeah,
what does that mean to this year?
It's a really good question. Look, I mean, I think that, so I'm a progressive Democrat, so I'm only going to speak for my own sort of position and views. I think our party owes a massive debt of gratitude to Black women who have consistently shown up, voted in the biggest numbers, and been the most active, passionate, and committed for the causes that we all say we care about, if you're, as I am, a progressive Democrat. We saw in the last election a lot of white women go the other way. And there's really important work that needs to be done. And I'm not in any way disparaging what anybody thinks politically, but I really hope that we see white women vote differently this time. My friend Jenna Arnold wrote a really powerful book called Raising Our Hands about the work that white women need to do to take a look at our own entitlement, our own advantages, and the ways that we really can lean into these policies differently. So I'm hoping that we see white women act very differently from a voting perspective. I'm encouraged by the volume of voter turnout. I'm encouraged by the numbers we're seeing with young voters, so I'm crossing my fingers. I continue to be just sort of concerned about the structural impediments, which, different voting date deadlines in every state is completely bananas. So that
yeah. Right before actually we jumped on, I spoke with my mom's my grandma on my mom's side, and she actually drove from New York to Florida to vote.
God bless her.
Because she didn't want to get on a plane. I'm just like, you're so cool. It's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Speaking about amazing role models, one question that we always come back to on, Anne Klein's Women Who Do is, who are the women in your life that inspire you?
Yeah, I love that question so much. So I think there's sort of like the public figure bucket. And growing up, I'd never seen a woman who was powerful and running things, like literally just didn't know that. And then Hillary Clinton burst on the scene, and I just owe this massive, massive, gratitude to her, because she certainly got me interested in politics, but I just had not known that one could be that. So Hillary is a very important person to me. My former boss, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who represents Oakland in California, is just my moral compass. She's a unbelievably brilliant, powerful person. And then I would say in my personal life, and this is going to sound a little funny, but my 5-year-old daughter is like my absolute role model. She's bold, she's loud, she's creative. It feels like this, oh, that's where it's supposed to be. And then we start covering up
Yeah.
all sorts of aspects of ourselves. And then
Hmm.
I just have these women in my life. I have women friends. I think they are my heroes. You know, they're just spectacular. And we've been holding each other afloat through this time. Like, I don't know what I would do without these. I like my husband, but like my women friends.
No, I hear you. I think I'm the same way. Like my husband's my best friend, but I need my girl time.
Yeah, totally.
I actually, my whole team is all women,
I
which
love
is
it.
really nice. Yeah. I intend on keeping it that way. It's nice to have like this close little kind of like sisterhood.
Totally.
um, so Chloe, we have a lot of questions I've seen coming in. Um, so I think we have time for one question. I'm just reading through these. Um, okay, Cup USA. They asked, tell us about your career transition to politics and your work on getting out the vote.
Oh, I love that question. So, I was the executive director of this wonderful nonprofit that's now run by Melissa Fenton. It's called the Council of Urban Professionals. And I was asked by then Mayor-elect de Blasio to come. I just let volunteer on the transition committee. Little did I know, like, that's what you do before you get asked to join the government. And I was 3 weeks in asked to be his head of appointments. People always thought I was his secretary. No, I was his executive recruiter, so I helped staff up the government. So, I was asked to be part of that basically startup that, that's what the beginning of government is. And it was, I think, one of the biggest honors of my life. I just feel so blessed that I got to be a public servant for those years. And then it's funny for the get out the vote thing. I grew up doing get out the vote because I worked in politics in Oakland, and we were putting stamps on things and going door to door. And obviously, all things have changed, and so my fingers are bruised from all the texting that I've been doing. um, but look, I mean, there's not a person in my life who's not doing something right now. My dear friend Elise is phone banking in Wisconsin. My dear friend Zuhaira is getting people rides to the polls because people can't get there and they can't afford to get there. So everybody is doing something, and it's all of these little incremental things. So every single bit counts up into the last possible minute. This weekend is critical. So I might even get my husband. He's not so much of this kind of guy, but I'm going to force him.
For anyone out there watching, what can they do this weekend to help,
Yeah.
even though it's kind of last minute?
So one of my favorite organizations is called When We All Vote. It's Michelle Obama's nonprofit. It's nonpartisan, but it's incredibly practical. It's very tangible. So there's a lot of swing state phone calling and texting. So I would recommend When We All Vote.
Okay, amazing. Awesome. Well, Chloe, thank you so much for joining us
Such a
today.
pleasure.
It was so nice speaking with you, and I think it was really great to have this conversation right before the election. Calmed my nerves a little bit, but I think we'll all just be hanging on to our seats until then.
Exactly. Well, thank you for having me so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and everyone out there watching today, thank you so much for being here. Loved having you. We will be returning in 2 weeks with Tanya Green. She's an Emmy Award-winning producer of a preschool children's animated program. So look forward to seeing you there. For all women who do updates, make sure you're following us at Ann Klein Official on Instagram and at Ann Klein on Facebook. Have a great Wednesday, everyone. Thanks again, Chloe.
Bye.